I would now like to introduce Ms. Mackenzie O'Rourke to give her valedictorian address.
I have to say, this is a little different than my freshman year speech class that was primarily on Zoom. But with that being said, I'm truly blessed and honored to have the opportunity to share a glimpse of my story with you today as we end today's proceedings. I have been a part of the Liberty family for 13 years, and for that, I am grateful. Grateful for the staff, the teachers, and the administration who has cared deeply for creating an environment that cares for its students. But I also cannot stand on this stage and not thank my friends and family who have loved me and encouraged me these past 4 years. To my dad, you taught me what it means to work hard, even when I really didn't want to, and you always encouraged me to go the next 3 feet. And when I am stressed, you encourage me to make a plan and work a plan, and you do it with all love. And to my mom, you taught me how to love people. You always encourage me to include people, and you tell me that everyone deserves to be included. And lastly, to my sister, Madison, you are one of the biggest reasons I am who I am. I look up to you in more ways than you know because of your humility and steadfastness. In my favorite book, Love Does, Bob Goff writes, I used to be afraid at failing at something that really mattered. But now I'm more afraid at succeeding at things that don't matter. If you know me, you know I live my life in a hurry. I'm going from what it feels to test after test, to game after game, to meeting after meeting. The cycle never ends. But I think many in this room can relate to this struggle. We just can't seem to get a break. And for me, I hit a breaking point. I learned the consequences of what happens when you try and do too much and things start to fall apart. I started to struggle with severe anxiety and loneliness, and physically, I experienced multiple episodes of abnormal dizziness. But these were all consequences of striving after one thing after the other, looking to gain man's approval. And I'll admit, I've always wanted to be known for something great. At one point, in middle school, it was to be just like the best female cross-country runner Liberty had ever seen, Elizabeth Renault. And in high school, it was to be just like my own sister. And so I would strive until I physically, emotionally, and spiritually had nothing left to give. And what I learned, and what I'm still learning, is that the more you let comparison drive your life, the more unfulfilled you become. The truth is, you will always be left unsatisfied, because comparison is a never-ending spiral. It steals at your joy day after day, moment after moment. And so my 7th grade year, I would go on runs after school with my long-distance track coach, Coach Buell. But there was something that happened on that run that has stuck with me throughout high school. One day, we were running in the neighborhood right behind Liberty, and it consisted of our typical small talk. And I was telling Coach B about how stressed I was for my upcoming races and my upcoming season. And I started to share my goals and how I wanted to beat records and be known for something great. And she noticed me falling into this comparison spiral. And she looked at me and said, Mac, you are not like the runners that have gone before you. You are Mackenzie, and she is going to do whatever she is going to do. And so I tell this story because we often hear the analogy, we're all running a race. But what I want to point out about the race that we're running is that it has nothing to do with the hurdles and obstacles we face. Rather, it has to do with the risk of wasting our time. And any runner knows you can't start a race too fast or too slow. But you really cannot let how someone else starts their race affect how you run yours. It's all about how we choose to manage the time we've been given. Every second counts. Time is truly the greater enemy. Not the hurdles you jump over, but your response and how you choose to spend the time you've been given when facing these hurdles. And for me, as John Mark Comer puts it, What you give your attention to is the person you become. And for me, I was chasing after things that were ultimately a waste of time because of the value I let them hold. I was becoming an individualistic-minded person, letting comparison dominate my thoughts, and ultimately, I was becoming someone who was fed by succeeding at things that just didn't matter. And so going into my senior year, I was incredibly anxious, worried about certain circumstances that were out of my control, and I was afraid that I wouldn't live up to the expectations of those around me. And so my soul desperately needed to learn how to actively surrender. And in my favorite Bible verse, Mark 8:34-36, Jesus says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For what does a man profit to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul?" This is what it means to surrender. Are we willing to give up our time and things that hold no eternal value? Are we willing to get uncomfortable? I sure wasn't, and I still don't always want to. But this is the best piece of advice I've had to preach over myself this past year. That is, where you are striving, you cannot be surrendered. And the more you let hurry dominate your life, the harder it becomes to surrender. Oh, what I don't want to be misinterpreted is that I regret my high school years and the effort I put into so many different things. That is not it at all. Rather, I regret the endless cycle of hurry that dominated my life. So back in January, the Lord literally sat me down to teach me the important lesson of the ruthless elimination of hurry. And so I'd like to believe myself to be a pretty nice person. However, in any athletic competition, I become a different person. And I learned the lesson that if my competitor gets really ugly with me during a game, I should never respond sarcastically, "Okay, girly pop." Why? Because you might just get a level 3 concussion. Anyways, during my recovery time, I couldn't watch TV, I couldn't read books, and I couldn't do homework. I know, you're thinking that's a really big shame. But during that week, every distraction that governed my life had to go. And I was left with me and my own thoughts. That week, I realized what I gave my attention to. I had let distractions dominate my life, and so the moment it was all stripped away, I had to ask myself the question, who was I becoming? And as I was preparing for today, the Lord kept reminding me of the people in my life who've shown me what it means to live a life that's ruthlessly eliminating hurry. For me, it's people like Mrs. Joyner, who no matter the craziness of the season, always says hello to you as you walk past her office. It's people like Miss Charles, who never rushes a conversation, even though she was planning on leaving 30 minutes before you walked in. It's people like Miss Kwam, who notices you holding in tears as you're walking out of the high school hallways, and she just gives you a hug. It's people like Coach Maddock, who listens to you after a really hard soccer game and just lets you cry. It's people like Coach Nikki, who checks up on you via Google Chat every day, even though she has her own child to worry about during your concussion. And it's the Crenshaws, who are constantly taking people along with them. It's Coach White, who truly makes you understand what you believe. It's Coach Moyer, who reminds you every day that you have nothing left to prove. And it's Mr. Hartzler, who stays after school with you almost every day to help you with physics, but then spends a few more hours pouring into you spiritually. And the list could go on of the people in my life who've shown me what it means to ruthlessly eliminate hurry. And so I'd like to finish today with a story. My junior year, I had a study hall in the academic advising office. And every day, without fail, Mr. Crenshaw would walk past my desk on the way to his office and take time to talk to me. And one thing I noticed on early in the year is that he never seemed to be in a hurry, because he always made the extra effort to talk to me. So one day in particular, I was studying for my US history test that was the next day. So you can imagine I'm probably already stressing about it. But Mr. Crenshaw walks in and he asks me to follow him. I assumed he needed my help with something, and so I happily followed. But as we got to where we were going, He grabbed this big pile of papers and he turned around. And so, at this point, I was extremely frustrated because he took me away from what I was doing, and he didn't even ask for my help. But whether Mr. Crenshaw knows it or not, he taught me a lesson and he changed my perspective on something. It's that following Jesus is not about what you can do for him. It's what he does with us for his own glory. He doesn't need to give us a weight to carry or a task to accomplish. Sometimes he just asks that we simply follow him. And so after doing this to me a few times throughout the year, Mr. Crenshaw told me why he did. He said, "Mac, the first lesson of discipleship, it's taking people along with you." So here's the point. Just as we are called to follow Jesus, we are also called to take people along with us. But you can't do this if you're striving for worldly satisfactions, letting comparisons determine your lifestyle, and allowing hurry to dominate your time. So this points me back to my question. Who am I becoming? Either I can choose to store up my treasures in things that carry no eternal value, or I can choose to take up my cross and simply follow in obedience. As C.S. Lewis once said, "The future is something which everyone reaches at a rate of 60 minutes an hour, whatever he does, whoever he is." So classmates, friends, and family, how are we going to spend the time we've been given, and who are we going to take along with us? Each and every one of you has a story. I've just been lucky enough to share part of mine. But what will it take for you to surrender it all at the foot of the cross and simply follow in obedience? I think we assume surrender means to give up, when in reality, it means to give control to the one who has been in control since the beginning. So don't waste your time thinking surrender is a later thing. Believe it or not, tomorrow is not promised. Give up what doesn't matter for the one who matters most. If you walk out of these doors remembering anything that I've said, know that there is nothing in all of creation that can separate you from God. In his eyes, there is no expectation you have to meet to be loved by him. And there is no mistake too great that can keep his love away from you. And there is no other treasure in his eyes more important than you. Because believe it or not, you were worth that excruciating price, death on that old, rugged cross. Thank you.